The USS Gerald R. Ford and the HMS Queen Elizabeth are the latest and most modern aircraft carriers in the world. Both use the latest technology to support planes like the F-35. But why has the British carrier not followed in the footsteps of the American ones and used nuclear for its power systems? And what are the pros and cons of being nuclear or non-nuclear in a modern navy? Now, this video is sponsored by NordVPN, and just like the latest aircraft carriers, it's designed to help protect you whilst you're out surfing the high seas of the internet, which at times can make the Wild West look like a calm and peaceful place. One of the problems I've had in the past with other VPNs is that once you're logged in, if their system is slow, then your whole connection is slowed down. However, when I tried NordVPN, I found there was hardly any noticeable drop in speed. Plus, you can have up to 6 devices run through one account, which is really useful in our house, because when the kids come home from school, we can have 3 computers, 2 iPads and an iPhone all being used at the same time, and the last thing I need is a slow connection and everybody moaning and complaining about it. Now, just in case you're not sure why you would need a VPN, basically, once you're behind one, it's much more difficult for hackers to find your real IP address and gain control of your computer to access any potential personal details like passwords, emails, bank logins and the like. And if you're on the move and using an open public Wi-Fi access point, your data is also encrypted. You can also use a VPN to disguise your real location for content that is geographically locked away from you, by making you look like you're in a different country, and you can choose which country you appear to be in from the simple-to-use NordVPN app. Now, if you go with their 3-year deal, you get up to 70% off, and you can get the first month free by using the coupon code CuriousDroid at the address now shown. There's even a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no excuse for not trying. And with that, let's crack on with the video. As the British influence and military budget shrank after World War II, so did the size and number of its aircraft carriers, in the belief that new carriers would be used as part of a larger NATO task force. So the last generation of Invincible-class light carriers was coming in around 22,000 tonnes, compared to the US Nimitz class, which tipped the scales at 100,000 tonnes. The British carriers were built primarily for anti-submarine warfare in the Cold War North Atlantic and not for projecting naval power around the world like the US ones. However, after the devastating Kosovan War of the late 1990s, Europe was seen to have done too little too late to intervene, so a European Union Rapid Reaction Force was proposed that would be able to act on a global level and independently of NATO and the US. As part of this, 3 new large aircraft carriers would be built which would share a common design, 2 by Britain and 1 by France, with the other European nations making up the support group. However, things didn't quite go to plan. The French cancelled their carrier in 2013 due to budget restraints and the belief that they thought the non-nuclear propulsion was a step backwards for French technology. So the British continued alone with the HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales, as it was now believed that bigger was again better, and that small carriers just couldn't provide the air superiority quickly enough, which was one of the number of lessons learnt from the Falklands War. These are collectively called the Queen Elizabeth class carriers, or QEC, and named after the First World War super dreadnought battleships, and not the current Queen of England, just in case you were wondering. Even though the QEC carriers are a bit smaller, they are still the second largest non-US Navy warships in the world after the World War II Yamato-class Japanese battleships, displacing 65 to 70,000 tonnes depending upon the final build. They were also to be of an adaptable design that could use either catabar, which is catapult assisted takeoff, barrier arrested recovery, or ski jumps for short takeoff and vertical landing aircraft, in particular the F-35B Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter.
When the British carriers were on the drawing board, nuclear power was looked at as an option. With the right design, it can provide enough power to run a ship without refueling for up to 25 years. Land-based reactors usually produce around about 1600 megawatts. The smaller marine reactors are a few hundred megawatts. These reactors have to be very small yet powerful for their size to fit in the limited space of a ship, even one the size of an aircraft carrier. This small size means that more expensive materials have to be used that are more resistant to radiation, and that the neutron interaction with the fissionable material before it escapes into the shielding is much less. So highly enriched weapons-grade uranium is often used. This increases the power density and extends the reactor lifetime, but is much more expensive and is a much greater security risk. You also can't rely upon gravity to drop the control rods into the reactor core to shut it down like on land-based reactors, because of the pitching and rolling motion of the ship in the sea, so any mechanical control systems must work flawlessly. This and extra things like the desalination of seawater to make fresh water for the cooling system all adds to the cost and makes it very expensive to build nuclear-powered ships. In recent years, there has also been a move against nuclear-powered ships, with some countries not allowing nuclear-armed or powered ships in their territorial waters, and as these are the flagships of the countries they represent, they are also carrying now ecological as well as political baggage. The size of the QEC carriers also limits where they can dock, and maintenance, if they were nuclear, could only be carried out at nuclear-certified ports. The UK has only 2 such certified X-berths at Devonport and Faslane. Maintenance also requires specialist nuclear technicians, and then there is the decommissioning at the end of their working lives. The US has a specialist area at Puget Sound for the disposal of their nuclear assets, and large areas in remote locations where the remains of the reactors can be buried. The UK, on the other hand, has still to complete the decommissioning of a single nuclear submarine. Although Britain could build nuclear carriers, all its experience is in nuclear submarines and not surface ships. The only shipyard set up for assembly of a nuclear-powered ship is the Rosyth one, which is currently booked up with decommissioning old nuclear subs and building new ones. It would also need to bring in a substantial number of nuclear specialists from the US or France at considerable expense, as we don't have enough of them in the UK. All this contrasts with the US, where the US Navy is one of the biggest and oldest nuclear operators in the world. It has a huge amount of experience that dates back to the end of the Manhattan Project in the 1940s. It's developed 27 different reactor designs that have been used in 219 nuclear-powered vessels and brought over 526 reactor cores into operation. It currently operates 81 nuclear-powered vessels, including 11 aircraft carriers and 70 submarines. It's clocked up over 6,200 reactor years, and the nuclear-powered vessels have travelled over 240 million kilometres without a single reactor accident, and it has a safety record that is second to none. One of the major differences between the new US Ford-class carriers and the previous generation Nimitz-class was the introduction of the more powerful A1B reactors built by Bechtel, which are both smaller and simpler to operate, yet generate at least 25% more power than the A1W Westinghouse-built reactors in the Nimitz. The Nimitz-class carriers have been in service since 1975, and in that time a lot of new technology has been developed, such as the EMALS electromagnetic aircraft launch system, as well as many more modern systems requiring an electrical supply. There is also the near-future weapons and defence systems like railguns, directed energy weapons and dynamic armour in the pipeline, all of which will require large electrical supplies, something that the Nimitz class had reached the limits of. The Ford-class carriers were designed to have at least double the electricity generating capacity of anything they would need now to allow for future developments. The US carriers use steam power not only to power the turbines for the propellers, but also electrical generators and steam catapults to launch the planes, steam being something which nuclear generators produce a lot of. But all the steam plumbing creates a lot of complexity, maintenance, weight and more manpower to operate, and also determines where the reactors are placed in the ship. While steam catapults have been very reliable in the past, they also have no form of feedback control and as such can transmit very large tow forces that can stress the airframes of planes, especially lighter ones, which means more maintenance, cost and aircraft downtime. So for the Ford class carriers, the EMALS launch system was developed. This uses an electric linear motor that uses feedback to accelerate the plane smoothly depending upon its weight. It also is lighter and less complex to fit than the old steam ones, and with a quicker recharge time should be able to launch more sorties in the same amount of time. Something which is often talked about is the unlimited range of nuclear powered ships. Well yes, they do have an unlimited range, but unlike nuclear submarines which travel alone, a carrier always is accompanied by the carrier strike group of supporting warships and supply ships which are often non-nuclear. The planes themselves also require aviation fuel which has to be replenished by supply ships along with food, water and ammunition if extended missions are ongoing. The Royal Navy has never operated nuclear carriers, so it always had oilers or fuel replenishment tankers to resupply its aircraft carriers as part of their operation. This meant there was much less of an incentive to go nuclear with the new carriers. Also, the cost of building and maintaining nuclear is much higher than running conventional oil-powered carriers, even with rising fuel costs factored in. It will take about 15 years before the cost of fuel catches up with the extra cost of building a nuclear version, and that's without the periodic nuclear refueling costs and the very expensive and problematic decommissioning at the end of their service life. Old conventional aircraft carriers are sometimes sold on to foreign powers, so some of that money can be recouped. Nuclear ships, on the other hand, cannot be sold on and become a liability. About every 25 years or so, the nuclear reactors in the Nimitz class carriers have to be refueled, and this can take them out of service for several years and is usually combined with a major refit and costs billions to complete. The Royal Navy has only a small number of nuclear technicians for its submarine fleet and would struggle to find new ones to look after any new nuclear carriers. So if nuclear was out, what could be used in its place? The solution they opted for was integrated electric propulsion, or IEP, with electric motors to drive the propellers instead of steam, something which is well proven in the commercial shipping sector but is still a novel feature in military ships. The new Zumwalt class destroyers in the US Navy also use this type of IEP propulsion. Using a combination of two Rolls-Royce Marine Trent MT30 36 megawatt gas turbines, basically a Rolls-Royce Trent 800 jet engine mated to a generator, and four 11 megawatt Wärtsilä diesel generators, this combined setup can supply up to 116 megawatts of electrical power. The QEC carriers have twin propellers, each driven by two 20 megawatt General Electric induction motors. The diesel generators provide the baseload supply for normal cruising, and when extra speed or power is required, the gas turbines are used as well. As the entire system is electric, the generators can be anywhere on the ship that is suitable, freeing up space for other things like aircraft hangar storage. Both the QEC carriers were designed with the EMALS launch system in mind, even though it wasn't fitted in the end, but they still have enough power generation to allow it to be retrofitted at some point in the future if required. Lessons learnt from the Falklands War showed that the STOVL, or short takeoff and vertical landing sea harriers on a light carrier like HMS Invincible, could carry out more sorties than conventional aircraft on a larger catapult-powered aircraft carrier like the Ark Royal, as it would have been severely limited due to the bad weather in the South Atlantic if it had been in service and it hadn't been scrapped 2 years earlier. So instead of using the conventional takeoff F-35C that the US Navy opted for, and which is suited to the larger Ford class with the EMALS launcher, The MOD opted for the F-35B Stovall version, which meant the need for a catapult and arresting gear was removed, and echoed the Falklands experience, but now with a full-size carrier and many more aircraft. A ski jump at the end of a runway requires nothing in the way of power or complexity compared to a catapult, but achieves the same result with Stovall aircraft. So in the end, the Royal Navy ended up with two of the most modern carriers in the world, but without going down the nuclear route. Yes, there were cost-cutting measures along the way, but then the US defence budget is around about 600 billion a year compared to the UK's 50 billion. And you could have two QEC carriers for the price of one Ford-class carrier with a substantial amount of change, and without all the nuclear baggage and long-term cost that entails, and still do a very similar job. What do you think of the latest carriers from the UK and the US? Let me know in the comments below. So thanks for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe, thumbs up and share.